Truthspresso episode 393.
In a world gone bonkers,
it is not, generally speaking, unruly, but fires have been started and...
where the culture is a dumpster fire.
We're coming for your children.
And churches have lost their way.
I am really uncomfortable with the story of the crucifixion.
It's time to wake up with Truthspresso.
Truthspresso.
Your weekly shot of truth. And now your host, Daniel Minnick.
Well, hey there, friends, family, foes, and of course, lurkers alike. This is Daniel Minnick, your host for yet another exciting episode of Truthspresso. And if you were looking forward to a new episode in the series going through and analyzing the Book of Mormon, well, I am sorry to disappoint you, but this episode is actually going to continue a series that I had done quite a while ago. Yes, indeed, this is part 12 of the series, Was Jesus a Socialist? If you've never listened to any episodes from this series, well, there are 11 episodes to catch up on. It was actually my coworker who unintentionally inspired me to start this series back in 2022. Now, although he is an atheist/agnostic who has dabbled in Zen Buddhism, there was one day where we got into a conversation about politics, as we often did at that time, and because he is a liberal Democrat who entertains some form of socialism, and he knew I was a Christian with conservatarian beliefs, he claimed that he could prove that Jesus was a socialist. And I chuckled then because I was curious where he got this information. He admittedly didn't study the Bible much. I was aware at that time of at least one article in the Huffington Post about Jesus being a socialist, and I knew of plenty that I had seen on the Sojourners website making that claim. Sojourners is a very left, liberal, woke, Christian, quote-unquote, site. I mean, if you go there, at least when I did, when writing notes for this episode, I saw a lot of rainbow colors and pictures of supposed pastors or priests or bishops or whatever wearing coats with rainbow colors. So yeah, take the Christian claim with a grain of salt there. Now, perhaps my coworker had recently read some of these articles thinking that typical pew-warming Christian goers knew very little about the Jesus they claimed to love, and that the journalistic activist scholars who write about these things know better than they. So I took up this claim as a challenge and released, up until now, 11 episodes in a series so far refuting the question, was Jesus a socialist? Part 11, the previous episode in this series, was almost 2 years ago, back in September 2024. Maybe it's time to add another episode to this series. And the reason for doing an episode in this series was that as I was sort of doom scrolling through X recently, I noticed posts from leftist Democrat politicians whining about things like, while the White House was shooting off 800,000 fireworks, there are kids who are starving in this country, or like, while Trump is fighting for Israel and Iran, people here are struggling to pay rent or cover health care expenses. And many of these same people said nothing of the sort when the previous administration kept funneling money to Ukraine without us knowing for sure how this money would be spent. And they also said inflation was transitory, and they weren't really that outraged when total price inflation hit over 20%. Then they figured the solution was to push a $2 trillion bill called the Inflation Reduction Act, and somehow the government spending a lot of money on boondoggles and Green New Deal initiatives would actually reduce inflation. Now, what about the questions about discretionary spending and people having difficulty making rent payments or buying groceries? We shouldn't easily dismiss these food for thought questions. Can imperfect leadership waste money that could be better spent helping struggling people? Sure. But as I was reading these posts, I started mumbling under my breath something that I remembered from John chapter 12. And let me read the account of Jesus at the hometown of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus as they were staying at the house of one called Simon the leper. Perhaps this was a leper that Jesus had healed earlier. Here at this house, Mary anointed Jesus' feet with an expensive box of perfume that she had saved for this very purpose. So let's read John 12, verses 1 through 8. Then Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, which had been dead, whom he raised from the dead. There they made him a supper, and Martha served, but Lazarus was one of them that sat at the table with him. Then took Mary a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. Then said one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, which should betray him, Why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief, and had the bag, and bare what was put therein. Then said Jesus, Let her alone. Against the day of my burying hath she kept this. For the poor always ye have with you, but me ye have not always. So as I was reading a string of posts from politicians on X complaining about how the 250-year celebration, the war in Iran, and other things could have been spent to help poor people, I muttered under my breath, almost without thinking, something like, He said this not because he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief, and he held the bag and bore what was in it. I began to think that there are plenty of politicians, yes, from both major parties, that use the Judas Iscariot argument. Just because politicians make a moral claim against their political opponents doesn't mean they have the moral high ground or that they're genuinely moral people. Much like Judas Iscariot, who was a thief. So why did Jesus allow a thief to bear the bag for his ministry? Well, the Apostle John tells us earlier in chapter 6 in his Bread of Life discourse, John 6:64 part B says, For Jesus knew from the beginning who they were that believed not, and who should betray him. And then verses 70 through 71 say, Jesus answered them, Have not I chosen you 12, and one of you is a devil? He spake of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, for he it was that should betray him, being one of the 12. So Jesus knew when he picked the 12 that Judas would betray him, yet he entrusted him with the bag of charity. Jesus basically gave Judas a chance to prove himself, knowing Judas would fail. I mean, was this poor judgment on the part of our Savior? That doesn't seem likely, but it does seem that Jesus could risk, as it were, failure to meet the poor, even in his name, for the purpose of this betrayal carrying out something. Kind of an interesting thought there that I just had about answering the question, was Jesus a socialist? But we aren't blessed with the divine nature that Jesus had to have this kind of information about people that Jesus had of Judas. We just have to use intuition and discernment to figure things out, like with our politicians. And discernment comes from more than bumper sticker theology, or the more modern meme theology. The writer to the Hebrews chastised some of the readers for being perpetual babies in the faith. He wrote in chapter 5, verse 14, "But strong meat belongeth to them that are of full age, even those who by reason of their use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil." So detecting good and evil isn't just about what someone says that sounds good. Our senses must discern good and evil. In other words, words alone don't matter. Motivation matters. Is the one who says these words being honest? Is the ideology of the person really honest with these words? And Judas Iscariot was the quintessential politician, it seems. As a thief, he wasn't someone who just violently plundered houses to steal stuff. No, as a thief, he was crafty. A good thief gains your trust first and then steals when you least expect it. A good thief portrays himself as one of the most moral people that you would meet. Judas Iscariot managed to get his position among Jesus' disciples by gaining their trust as a moral, compassionate man who wanted to help the poor. He also had a way of asking questions that would get his fellow disciples to say, "Yeah, good question. Why didn't I think of that?" A good thief and a good politician says things that sound like the most compassionate thing you've ever heard. And when they sound like the greatest moral insight, they could be an excuse for something. They're covering up something. Now, John's gospel account that we read earlier only mentions that Judas asked the question. Matthew's and Mark's accounts tell us that other disciples were in on the question. Let's read Matthew's account in Matthew 26, verses 6 through 13. "Now when Jesus was in Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, there came unto him a woman having an alabaster box of very precious ointment, and poured it on his head as he sat at meat. But when his disciples saw it, they had indignation, saying, To what purpose is this waste? For this ointment might have been sold for much and given to the poor. When Jesus understood it, he said unto them, Why trouble ye the woman? For she hath wrought a good work upon me. For ye have the poor always with you, but me ye have not always. For in that she hath poured this ointment on my body, she did it for my burial. Verily I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel shall be preached in the whole world, there shall also this, that this woman hath done, be told for a memorial of her. Mark's gospel account in Mark 14, verses 3 through 9 is similar to Matthew's account and mentions that there were some of the disciples that had indignation within themselves and said, Why was this waste of the ointment made? And it says that they murmured against her. And then what's different is Jesus says, For you have the poor with you always, and whensoever ye will, ye may do them good, but me ye have not always. And he makes a similar statement about the gospel being preached, and that this, about what she had done, will be spoken of for a memorial of her. So notice that both Matthew and Mark mention that several disciples, perhaps all of them, objected to what seemed like an obvious waste in the grand scheme of things. It's interesting that John's gospel, likely written later than Matthew and Mark, didn't mention what Jesus said in that last verse, that what Mary did will be a memorial of her when the gospel is preached. Now, Luke's gospel doesn't mention this account, but it does say something that could be confused with it. Luke chapter 7 does have Jesus staying at the house of someone named Simon, and that a sinner woman also dumped perfume on Jesus' feet and wiped them with her hair. The lesson was totally different. Now, despite similarities, this wasn't the same event. The Simon of Luke chapter 7 was a Pharisee. The Simon of Matthew, Mark, and John was a leper. Now, I'm not sure how a leper could ever be a Pharisee. In Luke chapter 7, Jesus never addressed the woman by name. In Matthew, Mark, and John, Jesus already knew the woman was named Mary because she and her siblings were his close friends. Now, only John says that the name is Mary, but you can infer it in Matthew and Mark. In Luke 7:50, Jesus told the woman, "Thy faith hath saved thee, go in peace." Now, why would Jesus tell that to his faithful friend Mary if he and she and Martha and Lazarus were all at the house as guests? Yes, Matthew and Mark don't identify the woman, but John identifies her as Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus. So anyway, now that that's settled, there's two different accounts of Jesus being at the house of someone named Simon where a woman poured expensive perfume on him. One was in Bethany at Simon the leper's house, where Mary, the sister of Martha, did this to prepare for Jesus' burial. The other was at Simon the Pharisee's house, where a sinner woman needed forgiveness.
The Christian podcast community is a cohesive group of like-minded Christian podcasters proclaiming the truths of Christ with expertise and passion in the areas of theology, church history, Christian living, evangelism, apologetics, parenting, homeschooling, sermons, and much, much more. So check us out at christianpodcastcommunity.org. christianpodcastcommunity.org. One stop for all your favorite Christian podcasts.
Now let's get back to the lesson at hand from the account in Matthew, Mark, and John. Judas Iscariot, being a secret thief, likely first thought of the question, if I can deduce and harmonize these gospel accounts here, Judas likely made a comment to the other disciples and they quickly agreed. And then Judas, as the leader of the consensus, posed the question to Jesus, why wasn't this expensive ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? Jesus, what gives here? You've taught us all about denying ourselves and serving others and giving to the poor. Are you just going to let this woman waste money that could have provided a meal to 1,000 poor people? Or maybe fed one poor family for at least a good 6 months? Yet if Jesus were a socialist, he probably would have responded much differently than he did in the gospel accounts. He didn't even say, "You have a good point there, Judas." He lectured on perspective. Matthew 26:11, he says, "For ye have the poor always with you, but me ye have not always." Ouch! What is this, Jesus? The poor you always have with you? How could you? You mean your life's ministry wasn't about setting up a government system to end poverty? Isn't that what the gospel of the kingdom is all about, especially if we read Sojourners? But me you don't have always? So it's better to dump expensive perfume on you than to feed a bunch of hungry kids? How callous can you be, Master? We thought you were better than this." Now, Jesus was not belittling or diminishing the importance of helping the poor, nor was he contradicting anything he taught before. In Mark 14, verse 7, Jesus said it this way, "For ye have the poor with you always, and whensoever ye will, ye may do them good, but me ye have not always." So Jesus was basically saying, look, there are plenty of good opportunities for you to help the poor. Whenever you desire, you can go ahead and give to the poor. Why are you criticizing this woman for honoring me when I am about to die a horrible death? If you want to give to the poor, you can go ahead and do that. Don't demand that this woman do what you could be doing. And what Jesus said about helping the poor is clearly voluntary charity, I might add. It has nothing to do with setting up a government system that taxes us to do it. So what about the politicians whining about fireworks and things like that, and vanity expenses to celebrate America 250, and all that could instead have been given to the poor? Well, these are the Judas Iscariot socialists. So that's a new term that I've just invented here. Judas Iscariot socialists, who ask similar questions to what Judas Iscariot did in a political, moral posturing way to guilt trip anyone who does something that they can use to their political advantage. And their outrage is selective outrage. Now here's Bernie Sanders in an X post on July 1st. While working families at home struggle, Trump is flying on a $400 million plane gifted to him by the royal family of Qatar. Got $187 million from the UAE for his crypto firm and made billions in real estate deals with the royal family of Saudi Arabia. Tell me again, Bernie, about your lavish fighting oligarchy tours, where you and AOC were flying high class, staying at expensive hotels and eating elite meals to give speeches about how the oligarchs are spending your money, or have too much money and are living lavishly. Now here's the House Democrats account on X on June 12th. Donald Trump is spending millions on a UFC fight while Americans struggle to afford food, gas, and health care. Let that sink in. So until we have a perfect utopia where there are no poor people, we can't spend money on anything to celebrate a once-in-a-lifetime, generation, century, history event. So any extravagance to celebrate a milestone 250 years of American independence could have similar criticism. Sounds awfully similar to, why wasn't this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? But the Judas Iscariot socialists will always find an avenue to make that kind of moral argument whenever spending isn't on their pet projects. Let's just do some thought experiment questions. How could you ever go with your family to a baseball game and buy some concessions and enjoy something fun if you could have instead sold those tickets for money or used the money originally to give to the poor?
How dare you!
It's not a silly question, but it's often a purposefully political question. How could you ever go on a vacation with your family? How could you ever take your kids to Disney World? Well, there are recent problems with Disney and woke propaganda, but forgetting all that, you get the point. How could you ever justify saving up money to pay for senseless amusement for your kids, when the more moral thing to do would be to use all that money for less fortunate people?
How dare you!
How could you even eat dessert, ever? How could you live in a house? How could you own a vehicle? How could you fill up a gas tank and drive your family to church? How could you ever do anything that anyone could deem excessive compared to anyone else with less? How could you ever enjoy anything about life if someone else out there somewhere is, say, dying of cancer?
How dare you!
All the socialism advocates I know have gone to sports events, have gone to theater, have gone to performances and opera. They love art especially. There's plenty more liberals that love art, which the logical person could even say that that's a waste of time and resources. And many have taken decent vacations and gone to fancy restaurants to celebrate things like a wedding reception or an anniversary or a graduation.
How dare you!
The argument is about the role of government and how it should tax and spend. All this waste that could have gone to help the poor. Well, show me a wealthy politician on Capitol Hill whining about the cost of a UFC fight or fireworks to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the United States of America, and saying that the money should go to help people with health care, and I'll show you a hypocrite. And I'm thinking of champagne socialists like Ro Khanna, who have a net worth of maybe even $230 million. And yet they're pretending to be warriors for the people while they bash everyone who's wealthier than they are. Now, these Judas Iscariot champagne socialists rarely give out of their own pockets in any sacrificial way, and they usually keep getting more wealth for themselves, using government to get more wealth, while nitpicking how every wealth expenditure should go to a government-managed social welfare program. And they rarely are open to the idea that fraud can happen with such things. For instance, the Government Accountability Office reported that SNAP fraud, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, that states have reported has been at least $320 million over a 2-year span. Imagine how much has not been reported. But it seems that any attempt to crack down on that means stripping SNAP funds from people. And think of how many of these same socialists were skeptical of Doge only because it was led by a wealthy guy who helped Trump get elected. And, you know, they never explained maybe how they could improve Doge because they thought that it was not really uncovering fraud, but they never offered really how they can help with it. They just fought against it. And I don't know how many of them are showing how much fraud is happening in government, because no, we have to keep sending the government more money for this utopian socialist economy. Sometimes spending can go to celebrate something important. As Jesus said, what Mary did was a good work. Jesus would soon die and be buried and be resurrected and ascend to heaven. The poor you have always with you. Whenever you want to give to the poor, you can do it. Mary recognized the significance of what Jesus would soon do. Jesus referred to it as the gospel that shall be preached throughout the whole world. And Mary wanted to honor Jesus. Jesus accepted that honor and criticized Judas Iscariot for his moralizing diatribe because he knew that Judas was dishonest and he was a thief, and he bore the bag and what went into it. And you have to wonder how many politicians who are saying similar things, how many Judas Iscariot socialists there are that keep talking about taking care of the poor, but in a government program redistributionist scheme, and how many of them are holding the bag and bearing what's in it, and they're really thieves. Now, Jesus taught taking care of the poor through voluntary charity over and over and over again. Not once do we see Jesus in the Gospels act like a revolutionary wanting to change the government for social justice. Not once did Jesus say anything about the need for government to fill the role of taking care of the poor. And this passage, this account, this story here, doesn't say anything of the kind either. So was Jesus a socialist? Well, I think 12 episodes so far in this series have shown conclusively that he wasn't. And when Judas Iscariot asked, "Why wasn't this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor?" Jesus didn't give a socialist answer. In fact, he even said, "The poor you have always with you." Jesus never said that some utopian government system could eradicate poverty. He said, you can give to the poor whenever you desire, and he taught and encouraged that. He supported voluntary charity, and he allowed for things that look like waste to a socialist to happen, such as pouring expensive ointment on him for his burial. Jesus allowed for Mary to break the alabaster box and anoint him with it because recognizing the gospel of his atoning death, burial, and resurrection is far more important than a hypocritical, political, secular philosophy of selective outrage that whines about the suffering poor for political gain. No, Judas Iscariot socialist, Jesus was not a socialist. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Truthspresso. Part 12 of the series was Jesus a Socialist? And so I hope that you will stay tuned for the next episode of Truthspresso, and God bless.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Truthspresso. Be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast app. Truthspresso is a member of the Christian podcast community. Check out other great faith-building shows at christianpodcastcommunity.org.